Okay, everyone. Of course it has to go back here. This is round 2 for recording this. We will walk through this one faster so it doesn't take as long. But my name is Sydney Jordan, and I'm going to be presenting on calcium today. So first off, I wanted to talk about minerals and calcium and what is a mineral. A mineral, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary through Lexico, is a solid, naturally occurring substance that is found in the earth. So calcium is a naturally occurring substance that comes from the earth and is therefore a mineral. Some of you may know that calcium can be found on the periodic table of elements. This is a unique feature which allows calcium to be classified as a crystalline element. To explain this, crystalline elements are already in their simplest form, and there is no need for our bodies to break them down into any other simple form because they're already as simple as they can get, and our bodies can then just directly absorb them, which is pretty cool. So, another classification that calcium falls into is that it's considered a major mineral. Now, there are several other major minerals that our body needs, but calcium is one of them. And major minerals are ones that our body needs more of in our diet. So specifically, we need at least 100 milligrams of these major minerals per day in our diet. Just a quick little history. Calcium was discovered in 1808, according to the Royal Society of Chemistry. This chemist, Humphrey Davy, was experimenting with lime and mercury oxide one day, and after a while he stumbled upon a resulting mixture of calcium, which is pretty neat to just so happen to stumble upon it. But he didn't create this, but rather he, through his experimentation, discovered an element that wasn't otherwise known to man before. Calcium in chemistry is classified as a metal, which is interesting to consider when we think of it and its importance in the human body. Now, there are different forms of calcium, different other elements that it can be combined with to form a calcium oxide or a calcium whatever thing that is fancy in chemistry to be able to provide those benefits. But for us, we're just focusing on the health benefits of calcium and how it is able to aid our body. So we all know that calcium is very important for our bodies because of it being found and being a major component of our bones and our teeth. We can't forget about our teeth. So almost 2% of our whole body weight is calcium. This makes sense because calcium is a major component of our bodies, and we have 206 bones. So therefore, adding all those numbers up and weighing our bones and the calcium and whatever else we have, there's a lot of that inside of our body. So because calcium is a major part of our body, it plays an important role in the structure of our bones, as mentioned before, and our teeth. So another function is muscle contraction, transmitting nerve impulses throughout our body, and many others, but those 3 are the main and the most important ones. So without getting into the physiology of muscle contraction too deeply, I learned a lot about this in my anatomy class, and it was really cool. Basically, calcium for muscle contraction is responsible for binding to troponin, in which then these myosin heads are able to form a cross bridge and pull on actin filaments and move the muscle fibers in our body closer together, which causes the contraction of our muscles. So simply put, that is muscle contraction without getting super detailed, but basically calcium is responsible for starting those contractions within our muscle fibers. Mostly the same thing happens for transmitting nerve impulses as well. This is really cool because calcium is a chemical that's released in our bodies to depolarize cells, and it also works within neurons. So it'll depolarize the neuron, which starts the process for sending an action potential down the axon to then communicate with the next cell or communicate with another axon and send that impulse to its target, basically. So the food sources I wanted to talk about, there are some common ones and some other really good ones, but the common ones are skim milk or milk in general, low-fat cheeses and cheese, and plain non-fat yogurt. These were the ones that were mentioned by our book, as well as kale, collard greens, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and several others. So, as you can see, next to each food source is the serving size, the recommended serving size, and how much calcium is contained in that one serving. So, for example, recommended that we drink a cup of milk, and there's 300 milligrams of calcium in that serving. So you can also note that most common food sources provide greater amounts of calcium to our diet. However, just one serving of milk a day will not help us reach our recommended value of 1,000 milligrams of calcium. This is why we need to include other food sources into our diet so we can meet the daily recommendation of calcium. And as you can see, for men and women both, ages 19 to 50, we are suggested to intake 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. Adequate calcium intake can be hard to achieve because about 30 to 45% of the calcium found in some of these common food sources is absorbed. So out of all of the calcium we eat in our diet, only about 30 to 45% of that is actually absorbed and used. So in reality, this is a really low percentage, and so we need to be constantly consuming the right amounts of calcium in order to meet those daily recommendations. So the most common food sources have a higher absorbency rate when compared to other foods like spinach or Swiss chard, because spinach and Swiss chard and other foods that fall into those same categories have calcium in them, but the calcium binds to other things, which then makes them a little bit more complicated. And so the absorption of calcium is much harder because it has to break it down and then absorb it, which therefore makes the calcium absorption rate lower than just milk or cheese. So on to some myths. One myth I found is that elderly women develop osteoporosis, and only elderly women do, which is false. Osteoporosis is more common in women in general, but it can also develop in younger women as well as men, depending on your health history, your diet, and your level of exercise. There's a lot of different factors, but it is not just seclusive to just elderly women. Now, osteoporosis is where the bones become less dense and more porous. As you can see, the picture, the one on the right is osteoporosis, and therefore those bones are more brittle and can be more easily broken compared to a normal bone that is, yes, the spongy bone is spongy, but it's not as porous, therefore it's not as weak. Another myth I found is that if you're lactose intolerant, you can't get the calcium. You can only get calcium from supplements, which is false. I personally am lactose intolerant, and I get calcium from other food sources, and some of them are dairy sources, such as yogurts and aged cheeses, because they can't contain little to no lactose, and they don't affect me as much. So I'm able to get my calcium that way. But it doesn't mean that all dairy products are off limits if you suffer from lactose intolerance. There's still many other foods that you can get calcium from, and a couple of those are like yogurts and aged cheeses. The last myth is that you can't get too much calcium. That is false. So, like with all things in our diet, there is such a thing as too much. You can have too much calcium, and this can be bad for your health. It is advised that a person who has excessive amounts of calcium, especially calcium in their blood, that they consult a doctor and seek professional evaluations to be able to then have a proper treatment plan for them. So, in all, just to wrap up what we learned, what I taught you, what hopefully you learned from this, is that calcium is very important for our bodies. It is a major mineral, which means that we need more of these substances in our bodies and in our diet. And it's important for our bones as well as our teeth. I wanted to emphasize that because I feel like it gets swept under the rug sometimes. Milk, yogurt, and cheese are some of the main sources that we can get calcium from more readily. We oftentimes think of those first, but it also can be like Swiss chard or spinach or other leafy greens. In all, calcium is a very important mineral for our body, and it makes up essential components in our bones and helps us live healthy, functioning lives. I really enjoyed this presentation and being able to learn about calcium, and I referenced all of my sources here from the many images that I gathered for this presentation, as well as the information from the book and other supporting information for my overall research and findings that I was able to collect about calcium and the important benefits it has for our overall health.